She was standing in the mirror that morning, listening to him scream at her from the bathroom. His voice was loud enough that she didn't need to be in the same room to feel every word like a punch. You're getting fat again. Disgusting. How did I end up married to someone like you? You embarrass me every single time we go out. Victoria just stared at her reflection. 38 years old, wearing a dress that cost more than she was allowed to spend on herself. A dress he'd picked out. A dress that fit perfectly yesterday. She'd learned, over 12 years, not to respond. Not to cry. Not to defend herself. Because any reaction, any small disagreement, would extend the conversation into hours of him explaining, in meticulous detail, exactly why she was the problem. Why she was lucky he stayed. Why she should be grateful. I'm talking to you, he shouted from the bathroom. I hear you, she called back quietly. What she didn't know, what nobody in their entire lives knew, was that on that exact morning, 5,000 miles away, a law office in Singapore was preparing to make a phone call that would change everything. A phone call that would reveal a secret so massive, so carefully hidden, that it had been kept locked away for 38 years. A secret that made her husband's cruelty look like the actions of someone kicking at a vault door, completely unaware of what was stored inside. Marcus emerged from the bathroom, already wearing his expensive suit, his face red with anger. He looked at her, really looked at her, and shook his head in disgust. You need to do better. I have a client dinner on Friday. I'm not bringing you looking like that. Victoria nodded. She'd learned that nodding was often safer than speaking. He grabbed his keys and his briefcase. He was already on his phone before he reached the door. I'll be late tonight. Client meeting. Don't bother calling. The door slammed hard enough that she heard the sound echo through the empty house. That's when her phone rang. Not her regular phone. The other phone. The one her father had given her when she was 16 years old, making her promise to keep it hidden, to never let anyone know it existed. The one she hadn't used in 4 years, because he was gone now. He'd been gone for 3 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. The caller ID just said, Lawson and Associates. Her hands shook as she answered. Ms. Chen. The voice was formal, professional, and somehow sad. My name is James Lawson. I'm calling from our offices in Singapore regarding your father's estate. I have some information that I believe requires your immediate and complete attention. Are you in a safe place to talk? Safe place? That was an odd question. A question that suggested whatever was coming next wasn't just surprising. It was dangerous. Yes, she whispered. I'm safe. And then James Lawson said something that would transform Victoria Chen from a woman counting her worth in other people's criticism to someone utterly untouchable. He said, I'm calling to inform you that you've just inherited $1.2 trillion. And your father left instructions that you should know something very specific about your husband before you do anything else. Everything went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from silence. The kind of quiet that comes from shock so absolute that your brain stops processing sound. Ms. Chen, are you still there? She was there. She was standing in the middle of a hallway wearing a dress her husband had chosen, listening to a man tell her she'd just inherited more money than most countries generate in a year. I don't understand, Victoria said. Your father, James Lawson continued, was not who he appeared to be. His import-export business was a facade, a very effective one. Underneath was a holding company, technically several holding companies, that controlled one of the world's largest investment portfolios. Real estate across 6 continents, technology sector holdings, energy infrastructure, gold reserves, cryptocurrency wallets. Your father was extraordinarily wealthy, Ms. Chen, and extraordinarily secretive about it. Why didn't he tell me? The question came out broken. That, James said carefully, is what he asked me to explain. There's a letter. He recorded instructions that you can only hear after you've reviewed certain documents. Documents that relate to your marriage. Documents. About her marriage. Victoria felt her knees weaken. What kind of documents? She asked, already knowing the answer would change her life in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. Ms. Chen, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer honestly. Is your husband currently in your home? No. He's at work. Do you have access to a computer? Somewhere secure, where you can review files without anyone seeing them? Yes. But Mr. Lawson, what is this about? There was a pause. The kind of pause that contains an entire story. Your father, James Lawson said slowly, hired an investigator to look into your husband's background 3 months after you two met. What he found concerned him enough to put several contingency plans in place. Plans that involved documented evidence of fraud, infidelity, financial manipulation, and, if I'm reading his notes correctly, what might constitute coercion and control. Victoria's stomach dropped. He left a sealed letter. James continued. He said you should read it after you've seen the evidence. But first, I need you to understand 3 things. First, everything your father left you is protected in trusts and structures that your husband cannot access, even if he's still married to you. Second, your father left you $50 million in an untraceable offshore account, accessible only to you. And third, he knew something about your marriage that he apparently didn't know how to tell you. What? Victoria whispered. What did he know? That's in the letter, Ms. Chen. Can you come to our office? We need you here as soon as possible. But before Victoria could board a plane to Singapore, She had to understand how she'd arrived at this moment. Because this wasn't a story that started with a phone call. This was a story that started 23 years earlier, with a girl who was too trusting and a father who saw danger everywhere. Victoria Chen had grown up in Vancouver in a quiet house with quiet money. Not wealth that anyone would notice. Her father, David Chen, was the kind of man people forgot within seconds of meeting him. Polite. Unremarkable. He told people he worked in import-export, and they accepted this without question. The kind of man who could disappear into any room. Her mother died when Victoria was 14. Cancer. Fast. And afterward, it was just the two of them, Victoria and her father in their modest home on a tree-lined street in West Vancouver. He was protective in a way that sometimes felt suffocating. He didn't let her have social media. He didn't allow her to talk about their family. He made her promise, over and over, that she would never tell her friends that he traveled so much, that he was away for months at a time. Why? She'd asked as a teenager. Because people are complicated, he'd said. And the ones who seem nicest are sometimes the most dangerous. She thought he meant strangers. By the time she met Marcus at University of British Columbia, she was 22, and she'd learned to be cautious about people. She kept her walls up. She didn't trust easily. So when Marcus paid attention to her, real, focused, devoted attention, it felt like someone had finally broken through. He was older, by 8 years. He was ambitious. He worked for a tech company and talked about startups and entrepreneurship in the future in a way that made it sound like he was building something remarkable. He was handsome in that way that made other women look at him twice. When he chose her, Victoria felt like she'd won something. Her father met him exactly once before they got engaged. I don't trust him, David had said afterward. Why not? He was nice to you. Exactly, David said. That's what concerns me. She thought her father was being paranoid. She thought he was projecting his own fear of losing her onto the first man who showed her attention. So she did what young women in love do. She ignored the warning and married him anyway. And for the first 5 years, she was almost happy. In the beginning, Marcus was perfect. The kind of perfect that made Victoria feel like she'd finally understood why people write songs and poems and stupid romantic movies. He remembered small details about her. He held her hand in public. He made plans for their future that included her dreams, not just his own. They bought a house in one of Vancouver's nicest neighborhoods. A modern place with floor-to-ceiling windows and an obscene mortgage that he said they could handle because his career was accelerating. He got promoted, then promoted again. Within 3 years, he was managing an entire division at his tech company, overseeing hundreds of employees, making decisions that affected the company's strategic direction. And around year 3, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic at first. It was small. A comment about her appearance. You look tired today. That color doesn't suit you. Are you gaining weight? Nothing that seemed designed to hurt. Just observations. Feedback. He framed it as care. I'm only saying this because I love you and I want you to be your best self. Victoria started going to the gym more. She changed her diet. She bought new clothes and colors he suggested. She cut her hair the way he liked it. And for a moment, things seemed better. But then the comments found new targets. Her friends. She saw them less and less. Because Marcus would point out that Sarah was manipulative, that Jennifer had always been jealous of Victoria, that her college group wasn't really her people anymore. You've grown past them, he'd say. You're at a different level now. They don't understand where you're going in life. Her work. She'd been doing graphic design, freelancing, loving the creative freedom. But Marcus said it was unstable. He said she should think about their future. A few months later, she quietly gave up her clients. She told herself it was because she wanted to focus on their marriage. The truth, if she'd been honest, was that Marcus made her feel like her career was a failure, like her ambitions were childish. Her family. He encouraged her to put distance between herself and her father. Your dad doesn't respect that you're married now. He's trying to keep control over you. It's not healthy. And Victoria, already missing her mother, already grieving in a way she didn't quite understand, found it easier to see her father less. Easier to take Marcus's side when he suggested that her dad was trying to interfere. By year 6, Victoria had isolated herself completely. Her friends had moved on. Her career had evaporated. Her relationship with her father had become strained, awkward. And Marcus was the only person in her life who mattered. That's when the anger started. It didn't come with warning. One day they were at a dinner party with his colleagues, and Victoria made a comment. Something small, something forgettable about a movie she'd watched. And Marcus's entire demeanor shifted. His smile became tight. His jaw clenched. And afterward, in the car ride home, he exploded. You made me look like an idiot, he said. His hands were tight on the steering wheel. Do you understand what you did back there? Do you understand that when you talk, people are judging me? They're thinking, that's the guy whose wife is clueless. That's what you're making me. Victoria tried to apologize. She tried to explain that she was just making conversation. You're making excuses, he said. His voice was quiet now, which was somehow worse than the shouting. You always make excuses. That's your problem. You never take responsibility. What followed was a 4-hour dissection of everything she'd done wrong that evening. Her tone, her body language, the way she'd laughed, too loud, he said, too desperate. The way she'd touched her hair, nervous, insecure. He explained, in meticulous detail, how her insecurity was the real problem, how it reflected poorly on him, how he couldn't trust her to represent their marriage in public. And Victoria, exhausted and confused and desperate to fix whatever was broken, started to believe him. This became the pattern. She would do something, say something, exist in a way that somehow caused him to feel embarrassed or disrespected or wronged. And he would spend hours, sometimes entire nights, explaining exactly how and why she was the problem. He never raised his hand to her. He didn't need to. The weight of his disappointment, the careful documentation of her failures, the constant implication that she was lucky he stayed with someone so fundamentally broken, that was enough. He took control of their finances. It made sense, he said. She was bad with money. She'd spend everything on frivolous things. Better to put him in charge. He'd give her an allowance. A generous one, but limited. He needed to know where every dollar went. It was for their future. It was for their security. She wasn't allowed to have passwords to accounts. She wasn't allowed to know his income exactly. He said it was complicated for her to understand. He said he was protecting her from stress. The truth was, he was protecting himself from scrutiny. Around year 8, the criticism evolved into something more aggressive. He started telling her she was fat. Not gently, not as feedback, but as fact, as something shameful, as evidence of her fundamental unworthiness. He'd make comments in front of his friends. He'd point out women who were thinner. He'd say things like, "If you look like her, I might actually want to be seen with you in public." Victoria started to believe that her body was an embarrassment to him. More than that, she started to believe that her entire existence was an embarrassment. And she couldn't leave, because where would she go? She had no money of her own, no career, no friends. Her father had tried to maintain a relationship with her, but she'd pushed him away so many times that the distance had become permanent. By year 10, Victoria stopped trying. She stopped suggesting they go out. She stopped wearing makeup to breakfast. She stopped expecting him to touch her with anything other than contempt. She became a ghost in her own marriage, moving quietly, trying not to provoke, trying not to fail any more than she was already failing just by existing. And Marcus, satisfied that he'd successfully broken her, started to relax. He even brought up her father again. "You know," he said one night, "you should reach out to your dad. Make peace with him. It's the right thing to do. We might even need him soon." Victoria didn't know what that meant. She wouldn't understand for years. When her father died, Victoria almost didn't believe it. The cancer came the same way it had come for her mother. Fast, aggressive, merciless. David Chen was 73 years old. He'd lived a quiet life, a careful life. And then suddenly, he was gone. Marcus refused to go to the funeral with her unless she lost 15 pounds in 3 weeks. "It's not negotiable," he said. "I'm not going to stand next to you looking like that. It reflects badly on me. And frankly, showing up looking the way you do, it's disrespectful to your father's memory. He'd want you to make an effort." Victoria tried. She starved herself. She went to the gym 3 times a day. She lost 8 pounds. Not enough. The funeral came, and she went alone. At the service, standing over her father's casket, Victoria felt something shift inside her. Not sadness. She was too numb for sadness. It was something else. A question. A whisper. A tiny voice asking. If her father had really been so neglectful, so controlling, so deserving of the isolation she'd subjected him to, why did his absence hurt so much? She didn't have time to explore that thought. 3 weeks after the funeral, 18 days to be exact, her phone rang. The phone with just her name listed under recent calls. The phone her father had given her when she was 16. A phone her husband had never seen. "Ms. Chen." The voice was unfamiliar. Professional. Sad. "My name is James Lawson. I'm an estate attorney. I was your father's trusted advisor for 30 years. He left specific instructions that I should contact you directly after his death. I have documents for you to review. Information that is time-sensitive." Victoria's voice came out small. "What kind of information?" "The kind that changes everything," James said. "Can you come to Singapore? It needs to be in person. And Ms. Chen, you cannot tell your husband. This is critical. You cannot mention this call to anyone. Your father was very specific about this. He said if you tell your husband about your inheritance before you understand the full picture, it will put you in danger." Danger. Victoria hung up the phone and stared at the wall of her beautiful house. A house she didn't own. Walls that felt thinner every year. And she thought about the last conversation she'd had with her father, 6 months before he died. He'd called her. She almost didn't answer. Marcus didn't like her talking to him. "Dad, sweetheart, I need you to listen to me. I don't have much time. And I need you to promise me something." She'd promised, though she couldn't quite remember what. "Promise me that when I'm gone, you'll look for me. You'll look for what I left for you. And you'll understand that everything I did, everything I kept from you, everything that seemed crazy, was because I was trying to protect you from someone." "From who, Dad?" she'd asked. He didn't answer. The line just went quiet. "From who?" she'd asked again. "Someone you're probably married to right now," her father had said. And then he'd hung up. Victoria got on a plane to Singapore 2 days later. She told Marcus that she was visiting a college friend who'd moved overseas. She told him it would be a week. He was annoyed. It cut into his schedule, meant he'd have to adjust his week, but he allowed it. He allowed almost everything as long as she remained broken. The Lawson and Associates office was on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in the central business district. It was the kind of office that you didn't get to unless you had serious money. And standing in that office, looking at James Lawson's face, a man in his 60s with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much, Victoria felt the walls of her reality starting to crack. Your father, James began, was not a simple man. That was putting it mildly. David Chen had come to Singapore in 1978 with almost nothing. By 1985, he'd created a holding company that would eventually become one of Asia's most important investment vehicles. He'd done it quietly. He'd done it carefully. And he'd built a financial empire so vast that if the world knew his true net worth, it would have registered as a seismic event. How vast? Victoria whispered. James slid a document across his desk. It was a single sheet of paper. On it was a number. $1.2 trillion. Victoria couldn't breathe. She couldn't process. She couldn't understand how a number that large could exist in the same universe as the woman who'd been told by her husband that she was worthless. Your father, James continued, made one decision early in his life that defined everything that came after. He decided that wealth should be hidden, not flaunted. That power should be quiet. That the most dangerous thing any person could do was announce how much they had. Because once people know, once they understand what you're worth, they stop seeing you as a person. They see you as a resource to be extracted. He stood up and walked to a safe that Victoria hadn't noticed in the corner of the office. He opened it and withdrew a sealed envelope. An actual envelope, the kind people don't use anymore, with her name written on it in her father's handwriting. He wrote this 6 months before his diagnosis, James said. He said you could only read it after you'd understood the basic facts of your inheritance. I'm about to tell you those facts, and then I'm going to give you this letter. And then, Miss Chun, your entire life is going to change. The facts were staggering. Her father had investments across 6 continents. Technology companies, energy infrastructure, real estate developments that shaped skylines, gold reserves in Switzerland, cryptocurrency that had made him unimaginably wealthy, art collections, shipping ports, agricultural companies, insurance firms, a controlling stake in a major bank. And all of it, every single piece, was now hers, structured in trusts and foundations and corporate entities that meant it couldn't be touched by anyone except her, not even a spouse. There's more, James said quietly. Your father was concerned about your marriage. 22 years ago, when you met your husband, he had him investigated. Victoria felt her stomach drop. James opened a folder. Inside were dozens of photographs, hotel receipts, bank statements, communications, evidence stretching back 2 decades. A pattern so clear, so undeniable, that even seeing fragments of it made Victoria feel sick. Marcus had done this before. He'd met women. He'd isolated them. He'd controlled them. He'd married them. And then, when the time was right, he'd divorced them and taken everything the law allowed him to take. There were 4 women before Victoria. For documented cases. 3 had gone to therapy. 1 had attempted suicide. Your father, James said softly, couldn't stop it with the others. He found out too late. But with you, he found out early. He wanted to protect you. He wanted to give you options. And so he did something I'm not entirely proud of. He hired someone to verify his concerns. And he kept detailed documentation. He slid another folder across the desk. Inside was everything. Photographs of Marcus with his mistress. Bank statements showing him opening accounts in his own name, hiding money from Victoria. Text messages between Marcus and his business partner discussing the long game of keeping Victoria under control until her family money came through. Emails to a therapist talking about manipulation techniques. And at the bottom, a single sentence that James read aloud. If she ever finds out she has money, I'll divorce her immediately and sue for alimony. I just need to time it right. James handed her the envelope. His hands were shaking slightly, as if even he understood the magnitude of what was about to happen. Victoria opened it slowly. Inside, on paper that smelled faintly of her father's cologne, was a letter. She recognized his handwriting immediately. The careful strokes. The way he formed his letters. A ghost of the man she hadn't properly said goodbye to. My dearest Victoria, she read aloud, her voice breaking. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And I'm sorry, sorrier than you can possibly understand, that I couldn't find the right time to tell you these things while I was still alive. But I was afraid. Afraid that if I told you directly, you would dismiss me the way so many daughters do when their fathers try to warn them about the men they love. So instead, I arranged for you to discover it this way. I hope you'll forgive me. When you met Marcus, I did something that I'm not proud of. I had him investigated. I know this violated your trust and your privacy. I did it anyway because being your father has made me paranoid. Being wealthy has made me understand human nature in ways that I wish I didn't. And something about him frightened me from the moment I met him. What the investigation revealed was worse than anything I'd imagined. Your husband is a predator, Victoria. I don't use that word lightly. I use it because I have documentation of a pattern spanning 23 years. He meets women with financial potential. He isolates them. He controls them. He manipulates them. And then, when he's extracted what he needs from them, he discards them. You're not the first. You're the 4th. The first 3 are still healing from what he did to them. But here's what makes you different. You're the only one who will have the means to leave. I am leaving you $1.2 trillion. Not because I want to spoil you. Not because I want to enable you to be frivolous. But because I want you to have a choice. I want you to have the freedom to walk away from a man who has spent 12 years convincing you that you're worthless. I also want you to have the truth. And the truth is that every cruel word he said to you has been a lie. You are not fat. You are not embarrassing. You are not unworthy of love. You are worthy of a love that lifts you up, not tears you down. I'm including in this envelope documentation of his infidelities, his financial manipulations, and his calculated cruelty. I'm including it not because I want you to use it as a weapon, though you have every right to. I'm including it because you deserve to know that his criticism of you has never been about you. It's been about control. It's been about keeping you small so that you never realize how magnificent you are. Here's what I need you to understand. Victoria, when you leave him, and I pray that you will, he is going to become dangerous in ways you can't anticipate. He will rage. He will cry. He will promise to change. He will tell you that he loves you, and that he's only been cruel because he was insecure, because his father damaged him, because of anything except the truth, which is that he's a bad person who made bad choices. I am setting aside $50 million in an offshore account, accessible only to you. This is your escape fund. This is your proof that you have options. Use it to leave safely. Hire bodyguards if you need them. Move to another country if it's necessary. But get yourself away from him. And here's the most important thing. Do not tell him you're leaving until you are ready to leave. He will try to manipulate you. He will try to find leverage. He will try to convince you that your newfound wealth somehow invalidates your reasons for leaving. It won't. Your reasons are sound. Your reasons are valid. Your reasons are that you deserve better. I wish I could protect you more directly. I wish I could have warned you in a way that would have landed differently. But I hope that by the time you read this, you'll understand that everything I did, the distance, the secrecy, the investigation, the contingency planning, was because I loved you more than I loved my own peace of mind. The lawyers will explain the structures I've put in place. Your inheritance is protected. He cannot access it. He cannot claim it. He cannot touch it, even if he stays married to you for the rest of your life. So now, my daughter, you have a choice. You can stay in your marriage and become untouchable. You can leave him tomorrow and never look back. You can build a life that's entirely your own. Or you can do something far more devastating to a man like Marcus. You can let him continue to think he's winning, while you systematically dismantle the reality he's created. Whatever you choose, know that I'm proud of you. Know that I see you. Know that you are strong enough to survive this, and brave enough to build something better. I love you, Victoria, and I will always be watching over you. Dad. Victoria read the letter 3 times. Each time, she found new layers, new meanings, new implications hidden in her father's careful words. James Lawson gave her the afternoon to process. He left her in a private conference room with water, tissues, and all of the documentation. File after file. Years of evidence. All of it pointing to the same conclusion. Victoria had married a man who had systematically destroyed her sense of self, and she'd never even realized she was under siege. But as she read through the documents, something else began to emerge. Something darker. Something that her father's letter had only hinted at. There were emails from Marcus to his business partner. She recognized one of the names. It was a lawyer. They were discussing strategy. Discussing how to position themselves for the big payday. Discussing which of Marcus's connections had the most money and which ones were most vulnerable to manipulation. One email made her stop breathing. The Chen girl is perfect, it said. Father's loaded but controlling. Won't let her talk to anyone about money. That means if I marry her and isolate her more, we can string this out for years. By the time she realizes what's happening, she'll be so deep in the hole that she won't know how to get out. And if the father ever dies. The date on that email was 6 months after they met. It was dated exactly 1 week before he proposed. Victoria felt her entire understanding of her marriage reorganize itself. This wasn't love that had curdled into control. This was a calculated con from day one. Marcus had looked at her and seen nothing but a resource to be harvested. He'd studied her carefully. He'd identified her vulnerabilities, her loneliness after her mother's death, her complicated relationship with her father, her hunger for belonging, and he'd weaponized them against her. Every sweet word in those early years. Every promise of a future together. Every moment she'd thought he was choosing her. It was all performance. All strategy. All part of a plan designed to extract maximum value from the person he'd identified as his target. There was more. Much more. Bank records showing that Marcus had been stealing from her. Small amounts at first, which she probably wouldn't notice. Then larger amounts. He'd been opening credit cards in her name, running up balances, and then hiding the statements. He'd been taking out loans against their house without telling her. He'd been systematically bankrupting her financially while she remained too broken to ask questions. And then there was the documentation of the affairs. Multiple women. Some long-term. Some brief. Some happening simultaneously. Every single one clearly documented with dates, times, hotel receipts. He'd been sleeping with other women for at least 8 of the 12 years they'd been married. All of it done while telling Victoria that she was too fat, too boring, too worthless to be desired. James returned to the conference room around 5 o'clock. There's something else, he said quietly. Something that your father updated in the weeks before he died. He handed Victoria another document. It was dated 3 days before David Chen's death. It was an addendum to the letter. Dear Victoria, it began, I hope you'll forgive an old man one more intrusion into your personal life. But I've just received new information about Marcus, and I need you to know what he's planning. According to my investigators, Marcus is about to accelerate his exit strategy. He's been receiving pressure from his business partner, who is, I should mention, a man with connections to organized crime, to liquidate his current investment and move on to the next one. In other words, he's planning to ask for a divorce. He's going to claim that you've been emotionally unavailable. He's going to position himself as the victim, and he's going to sue for spousal support, claiming that he's given up his career opportunities to support your mental health and emotional needs. He's planning to do this within the next 6 months, before you find out about me. Because once you inherit money, he'll lose his leverage. I wanted you to know. I wanted you to have time to prepare. And I wanted you to know, most importantly, that when you finally leave him, when you finally understand that he was never yours and you were never his, you will have options. You will have power. And you will be free in a way that most people only dream about. Victoria didn't go back to Vancouver for a week. She stayed in Singapore. She stayed in her hotel room. She read every single document. She cried. She raged. She stared at the ceiling for hours, trying to process a life that had been revealed as a lie. All of it. The love, the safety, the partnership. It was all a fiction designed by a man whose only goal was to use her. By the 6th day, the grief had crystallized into something colder, something more focused. She thought about her options. James Lawson had outlined them clearly, and they were stark. Option 1, leave immediately. Take the $50 million. Disappear. Start a new life. Let Marcus think she simply abandoned him. File for divorce from afar. Let her lawyers handle everything. Option 2, divorce him now. Use all the evidence to destroy him legally and financially. Make sure he walked away with nothing. Make sure the world knew what he'd done. Make his name synonymous with predatory behavior. Option 3, do something else entirely. On the 7th day, Victoria called the office and asked to speak with James Lawson privately. I have a question, she said. A hypothetical. Ask, James replied. If someone wanted to stay in a marriage while simultaneously dismantling their husband's sense of reality and building an unbreakable financial fortress, hypothetically, how long would that take? And what would be the goal? James was quiet for a long moment. The goal would be to let him believe he was winning while simultaneously removing all of his power. The timeline would depend on how patient you were willing to be. But theoretically, you could do it for as long as you wanted. A few months, a year, 2 years, and the person would never see it coming. Right, Victoria said. She already knew that. She was testing something else. Why do you ask? James's voice had changed. It sounded almost frightened. Because, Victoria said slowly, my father left me that letter telling me not to use my money as a weapon. He warned me about revenge. He told me to use this for redemption. And I'm wondering if there's a middle ground. A way to leave without leaving. A way to take his power without him ever knowing I was taking it. A way to make him understand, when it's finally over, that he never had anything real, that he was playing with someone far more valuable than he could ever comprehend. Victoria could hear the hesitation in James's breathing. That, he finally said, would be extraordinarily cruel. Good, Victoria replied. But also extraordinarily effective, he continued. If you did that, if you stayed married while secretly building barriers around your wealth, while secretly documenting everything he did, while secretly preparing to leave, he would eventually discover the truth. And at that moment, he would realize that he'd spent months believing he was manipulating you, when in reality, you were several moves ahead of him at all times. Exactly, Victoria said. Is that what you want to do? Victoria thought about all those years, all those small cruelties, all those moments when she'd believed his words, when she'd internalized his shame, all the times she'd stood in front of a mirror wearing a dress he'd chosen, listening to him tell her she was worthless. And then she thought about something her father had written. You can let him continue to think he's winning, while you systematically dismantle the reality he's created. Yes, she said. That's exactly what I want to do. Victoria flew back to Vancouver with a plan. It was intricate. It was patient. It was the kind of plan that required her to be an actor, a strategist, and a woman who could convincingly play the role of the broken person she'd been pretending to be for the last 12 years. Step 1 was hiring a new team. Not lawyers yet. Fixers. Security experts. People who specialized in asset protection and financial architecture. She met with them in a hotel in Seattle, never in Canada, never anywhere Marcus could follow. They helped her understand the structures her father had built. They helped her strengthen them. They helped her create additional layers of protection that were completely legal, completely airtight, and completely invisible to anyone who didn't know they existed. Step 2 was the secret recordings. Victoria hired a security firm to install hidden cameras in her home, not in bedrooms or bathrooms. That would be illegal, and she was careful about staying on the right side of the law, but in common areas. Living room, kitchen, office, everywhere Marcus felt comfortable enough to speak freely. They installed listening devices in his car. They cloned his phone. She knew it was extreme. She knew it was vindictive. But she also knew that she needed documentation, and not just emotional documentation. She needed hard evidence. Specific moments. Specific words. Specific admissions. Step 3 was the performance. She returned to her marriage and became someone she hadn't been in years. Broken. Desperate. Grateful. I've been thinking about things while I was visiting, she told Marcus the night she came back. She'd lowered her gaze, made her voice small. And I realize I've been pushing you away. I realize I've been difficult. I want to try harder. I want to be better for you. Marcus's entire demeanor changed. The coldness melted. He became attentive. He became loving. He became the person he'd been at the very beginning, when he was still hunting her. I knew you'd come around, he said, pulling her close. I knew if I just kept pushing, you'd eventually understand. Each word was a knife, and Victoria absorbed it without flinching. Step 4 was watching. She watched him text his mistress and tell her that the wife was finally breaking. She watched him call his business partner and discuss strategy. She watched him spend an afternoon on his laptop transferring money into accounts she wasn't supposed to know about. She recorded all of it. Every instance. Every conversation. Every lie. And every night, she documented it. Names, dates, times. All of it stored in a secure cloud drive that only she could access. 1 month into this performance, Marcus proposed they renew their wedding vows. I feel like we've lost the spark, he said. But I think this would help us reclaim it. I want to show everyone that we're stronger than ever. Victoria understood what he was really doing. The vow renewal would be a public relations move. It would cement the narrative that their marriage was solid. It would make it harder for her to leave later because she'd just publicly recommitted. It would be another lock on the cage. She agreed immediately. The vow renewal was planned for 3 months later. It gave Victoria 90 days to complete her final preparations. 90 days to arrange the untouchable financial structures. 90 days to finish collecting evidence. 90 days to build a legal position so strong that Marcus would have no choice but to accept his defeat. During those 90 days, Victoria became a ghost in her marriage. She moved through their home invisibly. She cooked his meals. She smiled at his jokes. She pretended to be healed by his attention. And all the while, she was dismantling him. She had accountants trace every penny he'd hidden. She had lawyers prepare documentation that would prove financial fraud. She prepared tax returns that showed his criminal hiding of income. She assembled the timeline of his affairs in a format that would be admissible in court. She was building not just a case for divorce, but a case that would make him understand that he'd never won it all. On the morning of the vow renewal, wearing a white dress and a smile, Victoria Chen was already gone. The woman standing at the altar was a stranger. A woman he'd never actually known. A woman who had been waiting, for 90 days, to detonate the world he thought he'd constructed. The vow renewal was beautiful. Expensive. A showcase of a marriage that looked perfect from the outside. Family members on both sides, though Victoria's side was notably smaller, isolated as she'd been. Friends from Marcus's work. His business partner. All of them looking at Victoria and Marcus and seeing what appeared to be a couple recommitting to their love. None of them had any idea that it was a funeral. That night, after the reception, Marcus was euphoric. He came home already drinking, already planning his next moves. Did you see how everyone looked at us? He said, pulling off his jacket. They were jealous. They were jealous that we had what they didn't. That our marriage was stronger than theirs. Victoria was quiet. You played that perfectly, Marcus continued, not even noticing her silence. You look like you were really recommitting. Like you actually believed in us again. You're getting better at this. You're understanding what I need from you. He went upstairs. He showered. He came back down in comfortable clothes, opening a beer, turning on the news, acting like he was exactly where he'd always been. In control. That's when Victoria said, "There's something we need to discuss." Marcus looked over at her, annoyed at the interruption. "I know about the mistress," Victoria said quietly. "I know about the affairs. I know about the accounts you've been hiding. I know about the business partner and your plan to divorce me. I know all of it." She watched his face transform. First confusion, then denial, then panic. "What are you talking about?" he said, but his voice had changed. It had lost its authority. "I also know," Victoria continued, "that you've been planning to ask for a divorce within the next few months. I know that you were waiting until you thought I was stable enough to ask, so that the shock wouldn't break me, so that I'd be compliant, so that I'd accept whatever settlement you offered because I'd be so grateful that you were finally leaving." "Victoria, this is insane." "It's not," she said. She stood up and walked to the desk. She opened a folder. Inside was documentation, bank statements, photographs, recordings, transcripts, proof of every lie, every infidelity, every manipulation. "I also know," she continued, "something that you don't know. Something that my father made sure I would know before you ever found out." She could see Marcus calculating, could see him trying to figure out what she'd discovered. "I inherited $1.2 trillion, and every single penny of it is completely protected. You can't touch it. You can't claim it. You can't leverage it. You are walking away from this marriage with exactly nothing." The color drained from Marcus's face. "You're lying," he whispered. "I'm not," Victoria said. "And there's more. I've spent the last 90 days building a financial and legal case against you that will ensure you don't just get nothing, you'll owe money. For fraud. For financial abuse. For the credit cards you opened in my name. For the loans you took without my consent. My lawyers are prepared to file tomorrow, unless you sign the divorce papers tonight. Agree to immediate settlement negotiations where you receive nothing, and never contact me again. This is blackmail, Marcus said, but he was standing now, and his voice had risen to a shout. This is illegal. I'll call the police. Go ahead, Victoria said calmly. And tell them what exactly? That your wife, who has every right to protect her assets, has given you legal documentation of crimes you've committed? They'll arrest you before they look at me. Marcus's face was transforming again. Anger was replacing shock. Rage was replacing calculation. You can't do this, he hissed. You're nothing. You're no one. I made you. Everything you are is because of me. No, Victoria said, and there was something in her voice that made him finally, truly, understand. I was always me. You just convinced me otherwise. And I let you. But that was a choice. And now I'm making a different choice. She slid the divorce papers across the table. Sign them, she said. Or face prosecution. Your choice. Marcus didn't sign the papers that night. He raged for 6 hours. He threatened her. He tried to manipulate her. He told her that she'd never survive without him. That she'd come crawling back. That she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Victoria just sat there. She wasn't afraid anymore. Fear required uncertainty, and she was certain about everything now. By dawn, exhausted and terrified, Marcus signed. The divorce proceedings were supposed to be contentious. Instead, they were anticlimactic. Marcus's lawyer immediately realized they were dealing with a client facing criminal charges. All of his bargaining power evaporated. He accepted the settlement. $0. The loss of the house, the loss of his car, the loss of everything except his personal possessions, in less than 8 weeks. The papers were finalized on a Tuesday. Victoria didn't feel euphoria. She didn't feel triumph. What she felt was something quieter. Something like breathing after you've been holding your breath for 12 years. Within 6 months, Victoria had moved to a new house in Vancouver. One that was hers, owned outright, registered in structures her father had built. She'd donated anonymously to foundations that helped domestic abuse survivors. She'd quietly reached out to Marcus's other victims, offering to help them rebuild their lives. 3 of them accepted. She helped them start businesses. She helped them buy homes. She helped them understand that what had happened to them wasn't their fault. Marcus, meanwhile, had become unemployable. Victoria never leaked the story. She never told his friends or his family what he'd done. She didn't have to. The truth has a way of emerging. The women he'd hurt started to talk to each other. They compared notes. They realized they shared a predator. And slowly, carefully, the narrative shifted. By the time Marcus tried to get a new job in tech, everyone knew. He was unhireable. He was untouchable. He'd built his entire sense of self on the ability to manipulate and control, and now he had no one left to manipulate, nothing left to control. He tried to reach out to Victoria once, about a year after the divorce. He wanted to discuss reconciliation. He wanted to explain his side. He wanted to reclaim what they'd built together. She blocked his number without responding. What she realized, in the months after leaving him, was that her father had been right about something. The most devastating thing she could have done wasn't to destroy him immediately. It was to let him believe he was winning while she quietly dismantled everything. It was to show him, at the moment of his ultimate defeat, that he'd never had any power at all. It was to teach him that some people, the real ones, the worthy ones, the ones worth knowing, were never his to break. With that understanding came purpose. Victoria took a portion of her inheritance, just a small portion, which was still enough to change the world, and she created the David Chen Foundation for Domestic Abuse Recovery. It didn't have her name on it. It didn't have her father's name prominently displayed. Instead, it was designed with a single purpose: to help people who had been isolated, controlled, and manipulated to rebuild their sense of self. The foundation provided funding for therapy, for legal services, for safe housing, for career development, for education, for the thousand small things that people who'd been abused need to rebuild a life that belongs entirely to them. Within 3 years, the foundation was operating in 15 countries. It had helped thousands of people. Among them were women whose stories were identical to Victoria's. Women who'd been told they were worthless. Women who'd been systematically isolated. Women who'd believed the lie for so long that leaving felt impossible. Victoria worked with the foundation directly. She didn't hide her story. In fact, she told it. Not to newspapers. Not for attention. But to the survivors who came through the foundation's doors. She told them so they would understand that what had happened to them wasn't inevitable. That they weren't broken. That they had power they didn't know they possessed. She started a program specifically for women in wealthy families. Because she'd realized that isolation and control wasn't limited to families without money. In fact, sometimes, wealth made it easier. Made it more elegant. Made the cage more comfortable, but no less real. And she learned something important in that work. Most of the women who came through the foundation had someone who tried to warn them. A parent, a friend, a sister, someone who'd seen the danger and tried to name it. And most of them, like Victoria, had ignored that warning. The difference was that Victoria's father had given her a backup plan. He'd given her the tools to escape. He'd given her the means to choose a different future. Not everyone had that. So the foundation became about trying to be that voice. Trying to be that person who sees danger and names it loudly enough that it can't be ignored. Trying to give people not just support but agency, the ability to make their own choices about their own lives. It was what her father would have wanted. It was what her father, in some way, had always been trying to do. But here's the thing about Victoria's story that I haven't told you yet. Here's the thing that makes it different from every other story about a woman leaving an abuser, about money saving the day, about justice being served. There's one more part. One more revelation that changes how you understand everything that came before. About 2 years after her divorce, Victoria was going through some of her father's personal effects. Things that had been stored in a safe deposit box. Things that James Lawson had held for her, but that she'd never gotten around to reviewing. Letters, journals, personal documentation of her father's own life. And she found something that she hadn't expected. A letter to her. But not the letter James had given her. A different letter. A letter dated 5 years before she even met Marcus. 5 years before she was even old enough to be dating anyone. My dearest Victoria, it began. And as she read it, everything shifted again. I'm writing this because I'm starting to understand something about myself, her father had written. Something that frightens me and that I need to prepare you for. I have spent my entire life trying to protect you from predatory people. I have built financial structures specifically to keep you safe. I have hired investigators to watch over you. I have made contingency plans for scenarios that I hope will never happen. But I've come to realize that there's a danger I haven't protected you from. Me. I have used my wealth and my power to control you. Subtly, yes. With good intentions, yes. But control nonetheless. I've limited your social media because I was afraid of what people would say. I've kept you from talking about our family because I was afraid of who would target you. I've isolated you because I was convinced I was protecting you. But Victoria, the truth is, I taught you to accept isolation. I taught you to believe that the world was dangerous. I taught you that trust was foolish. And in doing so, I made you vulnerable to someone like Marcus. Someone who would use those lessons against you. I was trying to protect you so completely that I prepared you perfectly for a predator. Someone who could isolate you further, control you more absolutely, because you'd already been trained to accept those things as normal. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if I can fix it. But what I can do is acknowledge it. And I can ask your forgiveness. And I can tell you that the person who kept you from the world wasn't the man who loved you most. It was the man who loved you so much that he was willing to break you in the name of protection. I hope you'll forgive me. And I hope that when you rebuild your life, you'll build something I never could. A life where you trust people. Where you take risks. Where you believe that the world is complicated but not inherently dangerous. Where you are free not because I've built a cage around your money, but because you've given yourself permission to be wild. Love, Dad. Victoria sat in the room, holding that letter, and she understood something her father had been trying to tell her all along. Abuse doesn't always wear a villain's face. Sometimes it wears a father's face. Sometimes it wears the face of protection. Sometimes it wears the face of love. And here's where I want to leave you with a question. A question that keeps me up at night, actually. Victoria's father built an entire empire to protect his daughter. He spent billions on structures and safeguards and contingency plans. He hired investigators. He documented threats. He prepared for disaster. And despite all of that, despite all that power and all that wealth and all that love, his daughter still married a predator. Because the one thing he couldn't protect her from was his own control. So ask yourself this. How many times in your own life have you ignored a warning because the person giving it was someone you didn't fully trust? How many times have you dismissed a concerned parent or friend because you thought they were being overprotective when maybe they were trying to tell you something true? And the second question, if you had absolute power in a situation where someone had hurt you, not just emotional power, but real, financial, legal power to destroy them, what would you do with it? Would you use it for revenge? Would you use it to rebuild? Would you use it the way Victoria did, to show someone that they never had the power they thought they had? Because I think that's what Victoria's story is really about. It's not about wealth saving the day. It's not about a magical inheritance fixing everything. It's about understanding that power is a choice. That the most devastating thing you can do to someone who's built their entire sense of self on controlling you is to quietly, systematically, methodically show them that you were never in their control at all. You were always untouchable. Drop your answer in the comments. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me if you see yourself in Victoria's story. Tell me about the warnings you ignored. Tell me about the power you discovered you had. And if you're in a situation right now where someone is telling you that you're worthless, that you're lucky they stay, that you should be grateful, hear this. They're lying. You were always worthy. You were always enough. You were always someone who could choose to leave. You just had to believe it. Don't forget to subscribe. And I'll see you on the next story.